Chapter 15. The New Testament serves as the foundation for Christian belief, particularly in affirming the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies. To accept its authority, however, one must also critically examine its historical reliability. Can it withstand scholarly scrutiny the way the Old Testament does? To answer that, we must look at the manuscript evidence, dating, eyewitness testimony, internal consistency, and external historical and archaeological support. Each of these categories strongly supports the trustworthiness of the New Testament. The New Testament manuscript evidence is a textual giant in the ancient world due to the quantity of manuscripts. No other document from the ancient world is as well preserved as the New Testament. As of 2017, the Institute for New Testament Textual Research in Münster, Germany, lists 5,856 known Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. These include full texts, partial papyri, codices, and lectionaries. When we include manuscripts in other languages, Latin, Syriac, Coptic, Armenian, etc., the total number rises to nearly 24,000. In comparison, Homer's Iliad, second most well-attested ancient work, won 900 manuscripts, partly due to archaeologists only counting complete copies, functional copies. Works by Plato, Tacitus, and Aristotle, typically fewer than 50 manuscripts each. But even taking complete copies into account, the time gap between the original New Testament writings and the earliest surviving copies is dramatically shorter than for any other ancient text. The earliest known New Testament fragment, the John Rylands fragment, p. 52, dates to AD 117 to 135 and contains a portion of John 18. It was written within 30 years of the original Gospel of John. Complete copies of the New Testament, like those in the Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus, are from the 4th century, less than 300 years after the original compositions. By contrast, Plato's works, 200-year gap between original and earliest copy. Homer's Iliad, 400-year gap. Most other ancient authors, over 1,000 years. In historical studies, the shorter the time gap, the less likely the text could have been corrupted. By this standard, the New Testament ranks unparalleled in proximity and abundance. Most ancient literary texts were rarely translated, but the New Testament was translated early and widely, especially during the 2nd and 3rd centuries, to reach diverse linguistic groups as Christianity spread. This enormous body of manuscripts provides a rich and reliable foundation for reconstructing the original text. Variations among manuscripts serve as a self-correcting system, allowing scholars to identify and weed out copyist errors or later interpolations. Importance of lectionaries. Early Christians, following Jewish synagogue practices, read assigned passages from Scripture on specific days. These were compiled in lectionaries, books of selected Scripture readings. Over 2,400 lectionary manuscripts survive. These lectionaries, dating as early as the 6th century AD, were transmitted with greater textual care than other manuscripts, serving as indirect but powerful witnesses to the reliability of the New Testament. Chapter 16. One of the strongest internal indicators for the early dating of New Testament documents is their omission of the destruction of the Jewish temple in AD 70. Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple in Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. However, none of the New Testament writings record its actual destruction, which would have been a major event confirming Jesus' prophecy. This silence implies the temple was most likely still standing when the books were written, placing many of them before AD 70. The Book of Acts acts as a timeline anchor for early dating of New Testament. The Book of Acts ends abruptly with Paul under house arrest in Rome, suggesting it was written before his execution. Many scholars date Acts to AD 62. Since Acts is a sequel to the Gospel of Luke, and Luke drew from Mark and other early material, it logically places Luke's Gospel before AD 62. Mark's Gospel possibly in the 50s AD. This further supports that much, if not all, of the New Testament was written within a generation of the events it describes, while eyewitnesses were still alive. New Testament authors frequently claim to be eyewitnesses or cite living witnesses. See Luke 1 verses 1 to 4, John 21 verse 24, 1 John 1 verses 1 to 3. This is not mere assertion. It is backed by striking historical accuracy. Historian Colin Heemer verified 84 specific historical details in the latter chapters of Acts, 13 to 28, including accurate local titles of officials, correct geographic references, cultural customs, weather patterns, and nautical terms, Such specificity would only be possible if the writer was either a participant or had direct access to eyewitnesses. Renowned archaeologist Sir William Ramsay, once skeptical of Luke's accuracy, ultimately concluded, "You may press the words of Luke in a degree beyond any other historian's, and they stand the keenest scrutiny and the hardest treatment." The New Testament also has corroboration from external historical sources. More than 30 individuals mentioned in the New Testament are verified in non-Christian writings or archaeology, including 1. Pontius Pilate. He was the Roman governor of Judea who oversaw the trial and crucifixion of Jesus Christ. He was mentioned by Tacitus, Josephus, and Philo. He was also confirmed archaeologically by the Pilate stone, found in Caesarea Maritima, 1961, with an inscription reading Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. 2. Herod the Great. In the Bible, Herod the Great is the king in the Christmas story, featured in the Gospel of Matthew, Matthew 2 verses 1 to 16, as the ruthless king who, upon learning of Jesus' birth, orders the massacre of the innocents in Bethlehem to kill the child. He was described in Josephus' Antiquities and over 390 coins inscribed with of King Herod, discovered at Masada. 3. Herod Archelaus. Successor to Herod the Great, ruled Judea. He was mentioned in Josephus' Antiquities and Wars, and 176 coins were found bearing his title. 4. John the Baptist. Josephus confirms John's preaching and execution in Antiquities 18.116 to 119. 5. James, brother of Jesus. He was called the brother of Jesus who was called Christ by Josephus, Antiquities 20.200 to 201. Josephus also reports his stoning under High Priest Ananus. 6. High priests Annas and Caiaphas were also mentioned in Josephus' Antiquities. Caiaphas' ossuary, possibly his, was found in Jerusalem with the inscription Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Moving on to some external historical support from early Christian writings. 1 Clement, c. AD 95 to 100, is one of the earliest non-biblical Christian documents, 1 Clement. References Paul's letters to the Corinthians. Describes the martyrdom of Peter and Paul, confirming early church belief in their historical roles. Provides early testimony to the circulation and authority of New Testament writings within the 1st century. Thallus, 1st century. Referenced by Julius Africanus, AD 220, who cites Thallus explaining the darkness at the crucifixion as a solar eclipse. Though the original is lost, Africanus' rebuttal implies Thallus acknowledged Jesus' crucifixion. Tacitus, Roman historian, AD 116. In Annals 1544, Tacitus writes, Christus, from whom the name Christian had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilatus. This confirms Jesus' execution under Pilate, the presence and persecution of Christians in Rome under Nero. Pliny the Younger, AD 112. In a letter to Emperor Trajan, Pliny states, Christians met before dawn, sang hymns to Christ as to a god, and pledged moral behavior. He sought guidance on punishing those who refused to renounce Christianity. Lucian of Samosata, 2nd century, a Greek satirist who mocked Christians in the death of Peregrine, acknowledges that Jesus was crucified and that his followers believed in his divinity and resurrection. Confirms the existence of a growing Christian movement. Phlegon of Tralles, 2nd century. Though his works are lost, Origen cites Phlegon's chronicles. References to an eclipse and earthquake during Tiberius' reign. States that Jesus predicted the future, was crucified, and rose from the dead showing nail-pierced hands. Looking at all the external historical sources listed in this chapter, the New Testament is not a mythological collection or a set of vague spiritual principles. It is backed by unmatched manuscript evidence. It is written within the lifetime of eyewitnesses that are key to verify the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It is confirmed by archaeological finds. It is corroborated by hostile and neutral historical sources. And lastly, it is internally consistent and externally validated. From the Pilate stone to the 1st century Jewish and Roman historians, from manuscript richness to early Christian testimony, the evidence is overwhelming. Christians can confidently affirm that the New Testament has been faithfully preserved and rests on a historically solid foundation.